In the 8th year of Jingtai, Fengtian Hall. Zhu Qiyu stands above the Dan Emperor. Behind him is a 10-year-old doll, and His Majesty Dan is an expressionless civil and military official. With a sigh, he looked up at his panicked brother. He finally asked the words buried deep in his heart. "Your Majesty, why did you rebel?" P.S. Forward warning, protagonist conspirator, not climbing the technology tree. Keywords of the novel. Why did the Emperor rebel? No pop-ups, why did the Emperor rebel? Download the complete TXT collection, Why Did the Emperor Rebel? Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Past and Present Lives. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Past and Present Lives. Endless cries of killing echoed from all directions, and in the distance was a sea of flames. A wisp of lonely soul drifted and fell on a strangely shaped crooked-neck tree, gazing at more than 10 people rushing in from afar with complex eyes. These people are clearly on the run. Several people around were holding long knives, their light blue flying fish robes stained with large chunks of blood. The long knives had already been sharpened, and apart from the blood, their bodies were dried up after being mixed with dust. They rushed around a middle-aged man. That person appeared to be only in his 30s, but there were already clusters of white hair on his temples. He was wearing a blue embroidered robe with dark patterns, and although there were no bloodstains, it was covered in dust. He wore a black winged crown on his head, but it seemed like something had hit him off. He hung it loosely on his head, shedding a few strands of hair, appearing extremely embarrassed. The people around looked anxious and alert, even though they were exhausted, they still held their long knives tightly in their hands. However, the person in the middle was different. He seemed to have lost his soul, his eyes were lifeless, and he walked deep and shallow, stumbling and being supported by people beside him as he walked forward. They walked to the bottom of the tree, and the person was helped to sit down, seemingly noticing the towering flames in the distance. The person woke up in a daze and asked Wooden, "Have they already taken over the Forbidden City?" The people around me knelt on the ground and walked up on their knees, crying bitterly. "Emperor, take care of your dragon body. If you lose the capital, we still have Nanjing. You are the foundation of the country. Let's reorganize our army and we will definitely regain the capital and restore the sun and moon." "Oh, the sun and moon are restored." The person murmured softly, and a hint of sadness appeared on his wooden face. His eyes were illuminated by distant flames, and his expression suddenly calmed down again. "Wang Chengyan, prepare MO, I want to issue an edict." The person next to Wang Chengyan, who was called Wang Chengyan, looked at him with a heart full of despair, thinking that his own prince had finally regained his composure. He took out his cinnabar imperial pen and knelt down on the ground, respectfully handing it over, but with a somewhat troubled expression. "Please forgive me, the Emperor. I left in a hurry and didn't bring any silk. It's okay." The person stood up, lifted the hem of the blue robe, and with a tear sound, pulled off a piece of cloth that was over 2 feet long. Upon tearing it apart again, a square piece of cloth fell onto my hand. He spread the torn square silk from his collar on a large stone beside him, took the red pen from Wang Chengyan's hand, and struck it like a knife. "I, Liangde, disdain my bow, and blame the heavens for my actions. However, all my officials have wronged me. I died without any face to see my ancestors. I removed my crown to cover my face, allowing thieves to split and not harming any one of the people." In just a few words, it seemed as if he had exhausted all his strength. After finishing the book, he put down his vermilion pen and reached out to take off the Ishan crown from his head. He placed it upright next to the square silk and tied the remaining collar into a long strip of cloth. He looked up at the crooked neck tree with a thick branch protruding, and smiled. "This is a great place to go." Wang Chengyan knelt on the ground, lowered his head, waiting for his own emperor to take the imperial edict. After a while, he didn't hear any sound. He boldly raised his head, only to see the emperor hanging on a crooked neck tree with his head draped and swaying, losing his breath. "Emperor, he has passed away." Wang Qingyan let out a cry like howl and collided with the large stone next to him, losing his breath. In the distance, a burst of dust flew up, and the cries of killing echoed from far to near. The guards who were originally scattered on the side woke up, rolled up their edicts and Ishan crowns, and charged towards the pursuing thieves. The great fire became even more intense, with flames soaring into the clouds as if they were about to burn everything in a big fire. He just leaned quietly on the old crooked neck tree, watching the distant fire and losing his breath as he watched his younger generation. After a long time, he stood up from the tree and looked at the tombs in the north, showing a smile that was even uglier than crying, murmuring softly. The 276th-year reign of the state was destroyed in an instant today. Brother, you hate me so much that you don't even allow me to enter the ancestral temple. But in the end, the great Ming dynasty was destroyed by your descendants. You and I are both sinners of the Zhu family. Stop it, it's not like going back, it's not like going back. He drifted with the wind, aimlessly drifting towards the distance, but where was the place to return? In August of the 14th year of the Jingtai reign. Night, in the capital. A bright lightning flashed across the sky, instantly illuminating the entire capital with a resounding roar. Pea-sized raindrops densely hit the eaves, forming lines of beads that flow in all directions. The current season is approaching late autumn. In theory, the continuous autumn rain should also be a light drizzle. But the rain, like a rainstorm in early summer, was fierce and heavy. Thick dark clouds lowered the sky like a massive shadow, enveloping the entire city of Beijing, suffocating people. The thunderous sound echoed through the sky, piercing straight into the sky above the prince's mansion. Zhu Qiyu widened her eyes, crossing the thick curtain, and a bitter taste of soup medicine came to her nostrils. There was no light in the room, only a few thin candles were lit, the light was soft and dim. It looks like the maids guarding the night accidentally kicked something while they were afraid of the darkness. Zhu Qiyu moved his fingers, feeling that he couldn't move and had no strength at all. With a faint light, he struggled to turn his eyes, wanting to take a closer look at the room in front of him. However, before he could fully examine it, a severe pain suddenly hit him, as if someone was holding a golden gourd hammer and hitting him hard on the head. Zhu Qiyu felt his mind was chaotic and his body was exhausted, and he just wanted to continue falling asleep. A bright lightning bolt shone through the window, illuminating the entire room. The only remaining bit of qingming in the Lingtai made Zhu Qiyu vaguely feel that he should wake up. So he propped himself up and reached out to sweep beside him. With a loud bang, the tea bowl on the bedside table fell with a crisp sound, shattering into several pieces. The sound quickly alarmed the people outside, and the two maids hurriedly walked in, looking at Zhu Qiyu's weak appearance with both surprise and joy. The prince is awake. The sound fell, and the quiet palace quickly became noisy. Countless maids and servants rushed in, and the room was suddenly brightly lit. In the chaotic crowd, Zhu Qiyu struggled to distinguish several familiar figures. Xingyan, Qingjing, Wang, Heng. When Zhu Qiyu woke up again, he was already surrounded by people. The room was still a bit dim, but it was lit up. The light is still soft, but it happens to be able to see people clearly without excessively disturbing their rest. He moved his arm and noticed that he was gradually gaining strength, so he propped himself up and glanced at the person in the room. My closest companion is Xingyan. Behind him is a charming woman in her 20s, and outside are a group of maids and servants. The woman was wearing a blue jacket and skirt at home, with no makeup on her face and only a pair of eyes that were red and swollen. Obviously, she has been crying frequently in recent days. Zhu Qiyu was stunned for a moment, then recognized this as the Hang family, his successor, or should now be called the concubine. I am younger than what I am familiar with. The lights were brightly lit outside, and soon an old man walked in, placing his hand on his pulse and counting. He also recognizes this person, who is from a hospital. I can't remember his name clearly. Following the old man in, there was also a dignified woman in her 20s. Unlike the Han family, this woman was dressed in a dark blue bao robe, with a light red shirt on the outside. She was not wearing a crown, but had a golden hairpin on her head. She looked dignified, but her face was tired, and a hint of worry flashed between her eyebrows and eyes. This is Wang Shi, his wife who was originally married, the queen of the prince's mansion. After surveying, the old man also finished his pulse and turned around to arch his hand. The Empress Dowager can rest assured that this night was the most dangerous. The prince has survived this and will be fine. The old minister has already prepared a prescription, and now you just need to take good care of it and slowly recuperate. Wang's furrowed brow finally loosened, and he escorted the person out of the door before turning back. However, before he could even reach the bed, tears welled up and he said, "The prince has finally woken up. Blessed by our ancestors." During the days when Zhu Qiyu fainted, Wang was the backbone of the entire royal family. When she cried, the maids around her also began to cry, and Han couldn't help but pounce on the bed and cry bitterly. The noisy crying, dim lighting, and countless scattered memory fragments made Zhu Qiyu feel a headache again. He clearly remembers that he was already dead. Died in the 8th year of Jingtai. On that day, his brother, who was imprisoned by him in the southern palace, rushed into his dormitory with his army and placed him under house arrest. His already weak body suffered this calamity and died of a disease. Moreover, after his death, he was stripped of his imperial title and buried in the western mountain. His coffin did not enter the imperial tomb, and his deity did not enter the imperial temple. No sacrifice, no offering, no sacrifice. He is like a lonely ghost with nowhere to go, wandering in this imperial city. Watching my brother ascend to the throne again, acting in reverse, watching people close to me being killed, imprisoned, and exiled. Watching my nephew ascend to the throne, watching the inheritance of the Ming dynasty from generation to generation. Until one day, he watched as the artifact collapsed, the ruler hanged himself, and the country changed hands. Heartbreak, anger, but helplessness. But now. Zhu Qiyu looked around, while Wang and Han were still sobbing, their voices subtle but he could hear them very clearly. Familiar faces, either joyful or worried, surrounded Zhu Qiyu, making him feel a bit dazed. Did he have a big dream? Xingyan. Zhu Qiyu opened her mouth, only to find her voice hoarse, as if she had been scratched on a stone by a blunt knife. It was obvious that she had not spoken for some time. Fortunately, Xingyan grew up with him from a young age, and even though his voice was weak, he could hear it clearly and immediately replied. "The servant is here. Now. When is it? What's going on outside?" Zhu Qiyu wanted to ask what year it is now, but when it came to her words, she felt it was inappropriate, so she changed her tone and asked vaguely. Xingyan only thought that his own master had been unconscious these days and wanted to know about the outside world, but he didn't think too much. He opened his mouth and replied. "Your Highness, it is the early hour of the Yin dynasty. You have been unconscious for 7 days, but fortunately, during these days, the capital has been relatively peaceful. The imperial consort Jiao and the leaders of the 6 ministries are in charge of government affairs, and any urgent matters need to be decided will be sent to the capital. Everything else that is not urgent will be suppressed. When the emperor returns to the capital to settle the matter, the military report from the previous sun will be sent, saying that the emperor has already set sail back to Luan and will arrive in the capital in a few days." Jiao Fuma, on his way back to the capital, with military reports. Zhu Qiyu keenly caught a few words and had a vague guess in his heart. His tone became a bit urgent, and he continued to ask, "You just said that I was unconscious for 7 days. So what day is today? Does the military newspaper say where the emperor is staying?" "Lord Hui, today is August 16th. According to the previous military newspaper, the Holy Master is stationed at the 22 fort outside Huailai City. As Xingyan's words fell, Zhu Qiyu seemed to have been hit with a stick under his head, and a golden star appeared in his eyes. He will never forget this day. On August 16, in the 14th year of the Jingtong reign, the military report arrived in Beijing, and the Ming army suffered a major defeat. Hundreds of thousands of troops were almost completely destroyed, and the Jingtong emperor was captured. His accompanying ministers and nobles were killed or injured. History says, the transformation of civil engineering. New book seedlings, take a look at those passing by, add a collection, thank you, end of this chapter. Chapter 2. Dreams are true. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Dreams are true. The rainstorm outside the window crashed to the ground, and there was no sign of clouds dispersing in sunrise, but the sky was already slightly bright. Zhu Qiyu was stunned when a commotion rang out from outside. Listening to the sound, it feels like a large team of people and horses running wildly in the rain. Without waiting for his command, Qing Jing, the head of the Wang mansion who was waiting on the side, retreated. After a while, Qing Jing walked in and said, "Prince, outside is the official army led by the imperial consort Jiao and the 3 major camps. It is said that they have fulfilled the imperial decree and the 9 gates of the capital are temporarily under martial law." Although Qing Jinggang didn't have much time to go out, Zhu Qiyu had already calmed the emotions of Wang and Heng in such a short while, making them slowly stop crying. Especially the Wang family, seeing Zhu Qiyu gradually regaining her composure, felt relieved and lost her composure. At this moment, she slowly regained her composure and regained the dignity of the queen. Upon hearing this, Wang frowned and said, "Martial law. Nowadays, the Holy Emperor personally marches, nominally allowing their prince to stay in the capital, but in reality, their prince is just a clay statue of a bodhisattva. The leaders of the 6 ministries are in charge of government affairs, and the official army is led by the Sun.in.law captain Jiao Jing. Their prince has been sick these days, and the affairs of the court have not been delayed at all." Therefore, although Wang felt that something had happened, he did not think much and instructed. "I think something happened. Tell the guards in the mansion to guard all the entrances. You should continue to inquire. If there is no major matter, take the petition to Shuntian Mansion and ask the officials to stay away. The prince's body is not yet fully recovered and he cannot bear the noise." Qing Jing received the order and was about to leave when he saw his own prince waving his hand, so he turned back and waited. Zhu Qiyu glanced at the slightly brightened sky and asked, "What time is it now?" After he woke up just now, although Wang's mood was excited, she did not forget to command the maids and servants to bring the warm tonic food that had already been prepared. He slightly advanced, and now his spirit has improved a lot, he has strength on his body, and his voice has returned to normal. "An hour is 3/4. Zhu Qiyu nodded and ordered, "The martial law in the capital is not a small matter. It must be a major upheaval. In just a quarter of an hour, the palace gate will be wide open. When the courtiers come to see you, go outside the palace and wait. If you have any news, come and report it immediately." Qing Jing bowed his hand and said yes, then tightly led the person out of the mansion door. After tossing and turning for a while, the sky gradually became clear and the rain gradually subsided. After Qing Jing left the door, Wang sent Heng away and commanded his men to serve Zhu Qiyu while speaking. "Your body is just right, Prince. Why are you so worried about these things? Now that the Holy Emperor has left the capital, Jiao Jing has said that he has accepted the imperial decree, which is probably the intention of the Empress Dowager. She is used to not liking your interference in political affairs. Your actions may attract reprimand again." Unlike the Heng family, who came from the common people, the Wang family, who was the official consort of the royal family, came from a noble family of hairpins and tassels. Although he did not hold a title, his grandfather Wang Quan was a hereditary commander of the Jin Wu Left Guard and a 3rd-rank military officer, ranking among the high-ranking generals. Therefore, the Wang family has been exposed to it since childhood and is not completely ignorant of political affairs in the court. My elder brother is not in the capital, so he instructed me to stay and do my best. Zhu Qiyu thought for a moment, but without telling the truth, he only said, the capital is under martial law, and there must have been a major upheaval. I will know earlier so that I can consider how to avoid trouble. So Wang stopped talking much. During the reign of the former emperor, he favored the current empress dowager, who was the son Guifei at that time, resulting in difficulties in inheriting offspring. There were only two princes who survived and grew up, one being the current emperor and the other being his own prince. The current emperor is the eldest son of the former emperor, and although his birth mother is the successor, she is also the legitimate palace state mother with complete books, treasures, and gold seals. When the former emperor was present, the holy emperor assumed the position of legitimate eldest son in the eastern palace. When the former emperor passed away, he naturally inherited the great treasure. Therefore, the two brothers never had any discord over the throne. Although the Empress Dowager does not like her own prince, the relationship between the prince and Jin Shang is still very good. Therefore, after Zhu Qiyu said so, Wang no longer advised him, but instead talked about the days when he was unconscious and the affairs of the mansion. On the other end, Zhu Qiyu was combing and changing clothes while also sorting out her chaotic thoughts. When he first woke up, his mind was chaotic, with various fragments crowded in his mind, messy and not very clear. Now his mind has become clearer and he has gradually sorted out a lot of things. In my past life, let's call it that. In his past life, he would ascend to the throne as emperor a month later, and then be overthrown by his brother who was imprisoned in the southern palace after 7 years of rule. The great Ming dynasty, also from that time on, went from prosperity to decline, and was overthrown by rebels 190.7 years later. These scenes seemed to be engraved in his mind, and even the tiny details were vividly remembered by him. But he also remembers clearly that in his past life, he had a healthy body in the past few years, and had never suffered from a serious illness, let alone a few days of coma caused by wind and cold. Looking at the overly youthful face in the mirror, Zhu Qiyu felt a bit confused. Which one is truly true? Or perhaps, the so-called past life was just a big dream, a wild imagination during his illness when his mind was unclear. All of this is too unimaginable. Although the scenes and even the bits and pieces are vividly remembered, he still cannot believe it, let alone speak to Wang. After all, if he were to say at this moment that he would become emperor in a month, Wang might consider him crazy. Whether it's a big dream or a rebirth of a lonely soul, it will be clear in a moment. If everything was not his dream, then the military newspaper should have arrived in the palace by now. It seems that the martial law of the 9 gates in the capital is also related to this matter. Wang didn't know what he was thinking in his heart and said something about what had happened in the mansion these days, continuing on. The prince has been seriously ill these days, and the mother is very worried. However, it is inconvenient for her elderly family to leave the palace, so she can only send people to visit every day. It is said that people have lost a lot of weight. Now that the prince has woken up, my concubine immediately sent a maid to the palace to report the news. After a while, when the prince's body is well, I will go back to the palace to pay my respects to my mother. Zhu Qiyu nodded. His birth mother, Wu, is now titled Xianfei and resides in the palace. During the reign of the late emperor, he favored the current empress dowager Sunday. As the only concubine besides Sun who had a prince, Wu had no good looks, although Sun was not jealous. Later on, the Sun family was in charge of the central palace, and the mother and son could only rely on each other for support. After the death of the late emperor, he ascended to the throne and also left the palace to open a mansion, with different titles. My mother's days have been better now, but she often talks about not being able to meet her son through the palace wall. So every time he visited the palace, his mother kept him for a long time until the key to the palace door was released. I think this time he was seriously ill and unconscious, and his mother was alone in the palace. Due to the rules, she couldn't even go out to visit him, so she must have been very anxious. Speaking on this side, Xingyan returned with Qingjing. "Prince, I was just outside the palace when I saw several elders from the 6 departments hurriedly entering the palace, saying that they were summoned by the Empress Dowager. I searched for the guards on duty last night and found out that there was a military report sent directly to the palace around the ugly hour last night. Shortly after, Li Gonggang from the Xinang Palace left the palace, and then the capital was under martial law. Qingjing is almost 50 years old, but he is different from ordinary eunuchs. He was a jinshi in the 22nd year of the Yongle reign. Later, he was implicated in a rebellion by the king of Han and sentenced to corruption, and was appointed to the inner palace for listening. After Zhu Qiyu opened the mansion, he was sent to the prince's mansion to be responsible for all the affairs of the mansion. Due to his previous experience as an official, Qingjing was much more organized in handling affairs than ordinary eunuchs, as evidenced by this inquiry. If Xingyan goes, it can only be said that several senior officials from the 6 departments have entered the palace. However, Zhu Qiyu didn't have the time to think about this at the moment. Although these news cannot explain the specific situation, at least they can explain one thing. Something big has happened, and it is likely related to the military newspaper. Zhu Qiyu closed his eyes and pondered for a moment before continuing to ask, "Can you see which old adults they are?" Mr. Wang, the Minister of Personnel, Mr. Hu, the Minister of Rights, Mr. Chen, the scholar of the Hanlin Academy, as well as Mr. Yu, the Minister of War, and Mr. Jiao, the Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Household, some of whom are not familiar with each other and look like noble relatives. As expected, something big happened. The founding of the Ming dynasty was only a few decades ago, and both Emperor Taizong and Emperor Xuanzong personally led expeditions, so the system of staying behind to supervise the country has long been mature. The emperor personally marched and left the royal family behind. Once in charge of government affairs, if there are urgent matters, send someone to send them off immediately. The usual memorial will be temporarily stored and will be disposed of when the Holy Spirit returns to Beijing. Other daily affairs, such as the congratulatory notes of various royal mansions, daily sacrificial ceremonies, and approval of non-capital punishment names, are handled by the supervisory authorities. Before departing from the capital today, it was ordered that the Prince of Qi stay behind and be assisted by Jiao Jing, the captain of the imperial consort. In other words, there are no affairs that require the intervention of the Empress Dowager in this political process. Moreover, this time, the Empress Dowager summoned almost all the remaining high-ranking officials in the capital. Combined with the sudden and unjustified martial law in central Beijing, anyone can guess that something big has happened. The urgent task at present is to figure out what exactly happened. But after summoning so many people, the Empress Dowager did not summon him as the prince of the imperial household, which clearly showed her vigilance against him. If you act recklessly at this time, it may lead to uncontrollable consequences. You should know that even though he is the prince of the imperial household, the great power in the court now lies in the hands of Empress Dowager Sunday. If it were to arouse her vigilance, it would definitely bring about more setbacks. Zhu Qiyu pondered for a while, and finally turned his gaze to Wang Shi. The queen just said that during these days when I was unconscious, my mother was very worried. Now that my body is well, Qingjing, go and send a message. I want to go into the palace to pay my mother's respects. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Entering the palace for an audience. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Entering the palace for an audience. In theory, Zhu Qiyu had just woken up. Although her spirits looked good, her body was still weak and she was not suitable to go out. But now it's different from usual. After all, Wang was the legitimate consort of the royal family. Even if she was slow, it was clear at this moment that Zhu Qiyu wanted to enter the palace on an excuse. Thinking of the news just reported by Qingjing, Wang's heart trembled. It seems that there will inevitably be a major upheaval in the court, and depending on the expression of our own prince, it is highly likely that it will affect the prince's mansion. So he stopped talking and hurriedly went down to prepare for the driving ceremony guard. The weather is gradually cooling down now. Anyway, the prince's body is still very weak. He needs to prepare his clothes and fur around the stove. If he gets wind again, his cold symptoms will recur. Zhu Qiyu went out temporarily and didn't say too much courtesy, but in half a burning incense, he was already ready to stop. As he was about to leave, he hesitated for a moment and instead of bringing Qingjing, he brought Xingyan. In his past life, both Qingjing and Xingyan were his confidants. Xingyan, needless to say, has been loyal to him since childhood. As for Qingjing, Zhu Qiyu was somewhat uncertain. Because he had always served in the capital of the feudal domain, the administrative system of the prince's mansion was not very complete. Except for the Yiming and Yangzhu of the Changsha department, as the attendant of the prince's mansion, Qingjing was considered to have the highest rank among the officials of the prince's mansion. Since entering the palace, Qingjing has been assisting the Wang family in managing the affairs of the royal family, and his actions have been very appropriate. It is precisely because of this that in his past life, he believed in Qingjing very much. After ascending the throne, he was promoted to the position of eunuch in charge of imperial affairs, responsible for managing the size of the harem. Qingjing lived up to his trust and kept the harem safe without causing him any worries. In theory, he should not doubt anything. But whether it's a big dream or a rebirth from a past life, the little things of the 7-year emperor have already honed this cowardly and mediocre king into a thoughtful emperor. Looking back, the deepest thorn buried in his heart. It was nothing more than the restoration of the southern palace, which directly led to his death. After his death, he wandered aimlessly in the palace city. Although I unexpectedly learned about countless palace secrets, I still didn't have a clear understanding of the inside story of this matter. At the time of planning this matter, he was still in office and most of the preparations were naturally outside the palace. Except for Chao Jixiang, who was directly involved, the only ones in the palace who knew about the situation were probably Empress Dowager's son and her own brother, the emperor himself. Secondly, although the restoration of the southern palace was very successful, the rivalry between siblings and the struggle for the throne was not a glorious thing. Even those who know a bit of the truth dare not say a word more. Therefore, even Zhu Qiyu himself still does not know the specific context behind it. But to put it another way, anything in this world, once done, will leave a mark. After he ascended the throne, all matters in the harem were entrusted to Qingjing. Several important places in the palace were also recommended by Qingjing. Among them, including Chao Jixiang, one of the main participants in the restoration of the southern palace. In his past life, Qingjing passed away due to illness 5 years later. There is no indication that he is involved in the restoration of the southern palace. But after the restoration of the southern palace, Zhu Qiyu had to think more. One thing is that Qingjing did not always accompany him, but was chosen from the palace after the founding of the mansion. At that time, the former emperor passed away, and now the emperor is young and weak. Naturally, the one in charge of these affairs is the birth mother of the emperor and the Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager's son, although not very attentive to him as a commoner, could never be considered friendly. Secondly, Qingjing did not enter the palace purely from a young age, but had already passed the imperial examination before entering the palace. This was originally the reason why Zhu Qiyu valued him. But now I want to come. Qingjing studied from a young age and was deeply influenced by Confucianism. He acted humbly and with self-respect. Chao Jixiang, however, is not proficient in writing and ink, and enjoys flattery the most. In theory, Chao Jixiang should be the type of person that Qingjing looks down on the most. But at the beginning, he was recommended by Qingjing. The strange part here, upon careful consideration, is definitely not simple. Unfortunately, in his previous life, Zhu Qiyu, due to his improper position, devoted all his energy to national politics in the hope of gaining recognition from the people of the court and the people. I don't pay much attention to these small details. Looking back now, if he had been more careful at the time, he wouldn't have ended up like this. In contrast, although Xing'an may be a bit reckless due to its youth, its victory lies in loyalty and reliability. This time entering the palace, it is still nominal to visit Empress Wu Xian. Wu Xianfei was the birth mother of Zhu Qiyu and originally resided in Yongshou Palace. After the death of the former emperor, except for the deposed empress who had two princesses, and the noble consort Sun and Wu, who each had a prince, all other concubines were buried. After ascending the throne, Sun was honored as the Empress Dowager and resided in the Xinang Palace. Wu remained a virtuous consort, but moved to the more remote Jingyang Palace. Jingyang Palace is located in the northeast corner of the palace city, far from the Xinang Palace located in the southeast. It seems that Empress Dowager Sun was too lazy to deal with the Wu family much. The palace city has 4 gates for entry and exit, namely the Meridian Gate, Donghua Gate, Xuanwu Gate, and Xihua Gate. Of course, these 4 gates are not freely accessible. The Meridian Gate, also known as the 5 Phoenix Tower, is located in the south and is the main gate of the palace city. There are 2 small gates on both sides, called the left Shun Gate and the right Shun Gate, which are used by ministers to attend court meetings and report matters. Xuanwu Gate is located in the north and connects to the harem. It is used by the nobles in the palace to summon their wives and daughters to enter the palace. It is also used as an internal supervisor for craftsmen and others to enter and exit. The remaining 2 gates are for ministers to enter and exit. Generally speaking, if the emperor or crown prince summons ministers on a daily basis, they also enter and exit through the Donghua Gate or Xihua Gate. Although Zhu Qiyu was attending a virtuous concubine, he was also a foreign minister and needed to enter through the Donghua Gate. The prince's mansion was not far from the palace city, and after about half a burning incense, the carriage arrived at Donghua Gate. He was riding in a carriage, and now he lifted the curtain to look outside, only to see that the guards were indeed much stricter. At the palace gate, from inside to outside, there are at least 13 or 14 guards on duty. Outside the palace wall, there are almost 5 steps and 1 post, and 10 steps and 1 whistle. Zhu Qiyu glanced and saw several Jinui Xiao with embroidered spring knives inside. Horses are not allowed to ride in the palace, but as the only younger brother of the emperor, Zhu Qiyu was given a shoulder guard and only needed to go outside the palace city to change trains. He was still feeling weak, so he didn't get off the car. He only sent Xing'an down to hand over the sign and pass it on his shoulders. But after waiting for a while, Jian Yu didn't come, instead an acquaintance came. "I have seen Prince Shi before, please give him your regards." The person was dressed in a flying fish suit, with an embroidered spring knife on his waist. He was tall and had a Chinese-style face, with a slightly gloomy expression. He arched his hand with a fake smile, which was considered a gesture of courtesy. "Commander of the Royal Guards, Ma Shun." Zhu Qiyu's gaze stiffened and he spoke, "With the help of the commanding officer, I am unable to withstand the wind and will not return the salute as I am recovering from a serious illness. Cough cough, a few days ago, my king was recuperating in the palace due to typhoid fever, causing great concern to the imperial concubine. Today, I happened to be a little late, so I handed over a sign and wanted to go into the palace to see her and reassure her. Unexpectedly, I alarmed Commander Ma. The sky is now dimly lit up, and the rain has almost stopped." Zhu Qiyu lifted the curtain and just spoke a few words. When the cold wind blew, she couldn't help but cough. Whether it was a big dream or a past or present life, there are always things that cannot be wrong. I now favor and trust Wang Zhen, allowing him to form factions and entangle with his followers in the court. Wang Zhen himself, as the eunuch in charge of the seal printing of the Imperial Household Department, supervised the East Factory and held the 2 key points of the Imperial Household Department and the East Factory. As the commander of the Royal Guards of the prince's own army, he is naturally also his confidant. Ma Shun is a genie guard recommended by Wang Zhen to take over. He always relies on Wang Zhen's power and is very arrogant, which is not seen by ordinary people. Now that the Holy Emperor personally marches, the defense in the palace is under the responsibility of Ma Shun and the Sun.in.Law Captain Jiao Jing. Although Zhu Qiyu looked down on him, he spoke politely. Although Ma Shun usually looks down on others, he is still somewhat polite because Zhu Qiyu is the younger brother of the current emperor. But today it was abnormal, staring at Zhu Qiyu and saying with a smirk on his face. The prince was joking. The hospital just reported that the prince has only woken up this morning and still needs to be well cared for. How could he be so anxious and want to go to the palace? Zhu Qiyu hesitated for a moment and said, "To be honest with Commander Ma, I have been seriously ill these days and almost unable to wake up. My mother has a mild and weak temperament, and she is anxious but unable to leave the palace. She sent someone to ask every day. As a son, I am now well, so I should invite you to see me and make my mother feel at ease." After a brief pause, Zhu Qiyu asked again, "I have been in a coma for these days, my mind unclear, and I don't know anything about anything. As soon as I woke up, I saw that the 9 gates of the capital were closed. Now that I have arrived at the palace gate, the labor horse commander has personally come over. But what important thing has happened in the capital? Or perhaps the emperor has won a great victory over Walla and won the class." After hearing his words, Ma Shun gradually calmed down. Not to mention anything else, the only son of Empress Wu, the prince, is indeed a sore-eyed woman. In the past few days, King Wu has been unconscious, and Empress Wu Xianfei has been fasting and reciting Buddhist scriptures, unable to sleep soundly. She almost begged the Empress Dowager to go out of the palace to see her son. Prince Shi often goes to the palace to pay his respects, and if there is nothing important, he often stays in Jingyang Palace for a whole day, showing great filial piety. Ma Shun is in charge of the royal guards, and gathering information is already his forte, so these are naturally clear. Moreover, as Zhu Qiyu had said, he has indeed been in a coma for the past few days. He woke up this morning, so it is unlikely that he would have known any news in advance, otherwise he would not have asked such a question. So, Ma Shun put away his playful expression and arched his hand, saying, "Your Highness, holding the waist token bestowed by the Emperor, you can theoretically enter the palace to meet the virtuous Empress Dowager at any time. However, unfortunately, the Empress Dowager has just issued a decree, and those who enter and exit the palace must be thoroughly investigated. If the royal ministers want to attend, they must obtain the Empress Dowager's decree. I have been ordered to handle matters, and I kindly request your understanding. Please stay at the palace gate for a while, and I will go and report to the Empress Dowager." After speaking, he turned around and entered the palace gate, reporting to himself. Not long after, Ma came back with someone along the way. This time, not only did he come alone, but also a eunuch wearing a python robe and grey hair came with him. Supervisor of Rites, Eunuch Bingbai, Jining. If Wang Zhen is the most powerful among the internal officials, then Jining is the most powerful among them. Except for eunuchs like Wang Zhen who are highly favored by the emperor, normally speaking, internal officials are highly qualified. Jining was one of the outstanding figures among them. He had already entered the palace as early as the reign of Emperor Taizong and served 3 former emperors. By the time of the former emperor, he was a pivotal figure in the imperial court and was highly trusted by the former emperor. Although Wang Zhen is a eunuch in charge of the imperial household department, he also leads the East Factory. He usually tries to win over party members and eliminate dissidents, so he lacks the patience to handle various complex government affairs. Therefore, except for the memorials that Wang Zhen found useful for himself, most of the other affairs were handled by Jining. Now that Wang Zhen is driving out of the capital, Jining is in charge of the imperial household department. Jining Ping was usually reserved in his words and smiles, and the same was true this time. He walked up to the carriage, bowed, and said, My courtier Jining has seen Prince Qi and has been instructed by the Empress Dowager to enter the Benren Hall to discuss matters. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. First Battle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. First Battle. Jining handled the matter properly, and when she came over, she directly passed it on to her shoulder. Zhu Qiyu got off the carriage, changed his shoulders, and headed all the way to the Wenhua Hall. Sitting on her shoulder, Zhu Qiyu wrapped herself in a thick cloak, holding a warm stove in her hand, and asked Jining beside her. Why didn't the Empress Dowager summon the courtiers at the Sinang Palace? Just now, Jining sent a message saying that the Empress Dowager is setting up the Benren Hall. This name may seem unfamiliar, but it has another name called Wenhuadian. Of course, it's not the main hall. The Benren Hall is the eastern side hall of the Wenhua Hall. As is well known, the Fengtian Palace, as the main hall of the palace, is only used for general court meetings. The Wenhua Hall and Wuying Hall, located on both sides of the Fengtian Hall, are the temporary halls used by the emperor to summon officials and discuss political affairs. Nowadays, the emperor is not in the capital, and various main halls are not allowed to be used, which is normal. However, the Empress Dowager usually resides in the Sinang Palace, and although she does not summon ministers frequently, it is not uncommon. However, this time, the Benren Palace was opened, and Zhu Qiyu had this question. Of course, there is another meaning behind this statement. There is no need to explicitly state it, but Zhu Qiyu believes that with Jining's political literacy, he can understand it. Lord Hui, I don't know about this insider, but it seems to be related to the court's politics. Jining didn't answer immediately, pondered for a moment before speaking back. Zhu Qiyu nodded and asked no more questions. If Jining could click here, it would be a great honor. The system of the Ming dynasty is very unique. Simply put, mutual restraint and mutual suppression. Although it is not as perfect as in the next few dynasties, this is deeply rooted and reflected in all aspects. In this matter, it is about the limit of power of the Empress Dowager. Simply put, the Empress Dowager's power comes from the emperor, but at the same time, it is higher than the emperor. It may seem contradictory, but it is the essence of the power structure in the harem. Legally speaking, imperial power is supreme, and only the emperor can represent it. Whether it is officials, nobles, or concubines, power is granted by the emperor, including the Empress Dowager. Ruling on government affairs belongs to the power of the emperor, and the Empress Dowager herself does not have this power. She can influence government affairs through various means, such as reusing relatives, supporting eunuchs, and even directly transmitting messages to the emperor, but cannot directly intervene in decision-making on government affairs. That's why, when the emperor personally marched, it was the emperor who supervised the country, not the Empress Dowager. Of course, in special circumstances, the Empress Dowager can also directly intervene in court politics, such as the late Empress Dowager Zhang, who was young and weak, and served as regent in accordance with the late imperial decree. This is the only way recognized by the court for the Empress Dowager to directly intervene in government affairs. But this approach is extremely unique. Legally speaking, it is not the Empress Dowager who has the imperial power, but the previous emperor passed on the imperial power to the new emperor. However, the new emperor does not have the ability to exercise power, so it is temporarily kept by the Empress Dowager for a period of time. This principle is the same as that of parents in the folk who keep their children's lucky money. Money is not owned by parents, but children do not know how to spend it in order to prevent it from being ruined. So parents, as guardians, temporarily keep it. Of course, there is still a difference between imperial power and lucky money. Generally speaking, if you don't keep it, it will disappear. So logically speaking, now that the emperor is in his prime, Empress Dowager's son has no possibility of openly ordering her courtiers to intervene in government affairs. Unless, the prince will stay here for a moment, and we will go in to inform the Virgin Mary. Donghua Gate and Wenhua Hall were only a few steps away, and in just a few words, they arrived at the entrance of the hall. Jining pleaded guilty and went in to report. Not long after, Li Yongchang, the eunuch in charge next to the Empress Dowager, came out and said. The Empress Dowager ordered the prince to enter the palace. Zhu Qiyu's body was still weak. As he stepped down from his shoulder, the cold wind blew and he coughed violently again. Xingyan beside him quickly helped him, and then he entered the hall. The Hall of Benevolence is only a side hall, and it is not very large. When Zhu Qiyu entered, several people had already sat, all of whom were prominent figures with names and surnames in the court. Zhu Qiyu took a glance. In addition to the people reported to him by Qingjing, there are also a few faces. They are Gao Gu, the Minister of Works and Bachelor of the Hanlin Academy, Chen Yi, the Left Imperial Censor, Su Qian, the Hanlin Assistant Lecturer, and several officials from the 6 departments. At the same time, after Zhu Qiyu woke up, he also saw for the first time the person he didn't know how to treat, Yu Qian. When Zhu Qiyu entered the hall, it was very quiet and the atmosphere was quite low. Empress Dowager's son sat in the upper position, with Jining and Ma Shun standing beside her. Both of them were observing the nose and the heart, their faces calm and expressionless, without any emotion. In contrast, Empress Dowager's son's face was slightly haggard, indicating that she had carefully concealed it, but still couldn't cover her slightly swollen and red eyes. Looking further down, several ministers sat at the bottom, their brows furrowed and their expressions gloomy. It was not until seeing Zhu Qiyu come in that they all stood up and bowed with their hands. Zhu Qiyu nodded in return and immediately approached, bowing to Empress Dowager Sunday. My lord, King Qiyu, see the Empress Dowager. Free of charge, sit down. In front of the courtiers, Empress Dowager Sun has always been elegant and generous. Although her mood is already terrible at this moment, she still squeezed out a smile, waved her hand, and ordered the eunuch to lift up a soft bed. Before the emperor left the capital, he said to the AI family to take good care of your mother and son. However, unexpectedly, shortly after you were in charge of the country, you contracted a cold and became seriously ill, causing great concern for both the AI family and your mother's consort. Fortunately, I received a reward this morning, stating that you had been seriously ill and had just woken up, but your body was still very weak. The AI family was planning to send some warm and nourishing medicinal herbs to you these days, so that you could settle down in the mansion and take good care of your body. However, unexpectedly, before I could be happy for a moment, I received such bad news. As Empress Dowager Sun spoke, she couldn't help but wipe away her tears, and the atmosphere that had slightly livened up in the hall suddenly fell silent again. Zhu Qiyu sighed in her heart. Back then, Empress Dowager Sun was able to win the favor of Emperor Xian for many years alone, even causing Emperor Xian to depose and establish a mother for her. She was indeed not an ordinary person. This statement not only expressed the concern of the legitimate mother for her illegitimate son, but also secretly defended herself in front of the minister. It was not that Empress Dowager Sun deliberately rejected the royal family, but also that Zhu Qiyu had just woken up from a serious illness, afraid that he would not be able to withstand the blow. Although Zhu Qiyu was used to the intrigue, she still felt a bit nauseous in her heart. Whether in her past or present life, Empress Dowager Sun did not treat her mother and son well. She was usually in the harem and did not even have a good expression. Only in front of a group of ministers would she appear like this Virgin Mary. Standing up again from the couch, Zhu Qiyu said, I occasionally felt a cold wind and worried about the Virgin Mary, which is actually my sin. However, I don't know what happened and let the Virgin Mary use the word bad news. The emperor is fighting outside, and such dangerous words should not be spoken lightly, only to worry about the Virgin Mary. Isn't it just a knife? In his past life, he was drifting and wandering. In this forbidden city, he saw countless people with strange emotions, and as soon as he spoke, he plunged into his heart's nest. And even if he stabs the knife, he still stabs with righteousness, and his righteous words are equally impeccable. Even Empress Dowager Sun, who was wiping away her tears, paused for a moment, feeling a surge of anger burning through her heart but unable to erupt. The military newspaper was only sent to the palace at the hour of evening today, and was personally delivered by the Minister of War, Yu Qian. In theory, there is no possibility of leakage, let alone being known by a newly awakened prince. The saying goes that those who do not know are not guilty. Even if she has anger in her heart, she cannot take this opportunity to get angry. On the contrary, in the eyes of all the ministers, the words of the King of Qi were not only insincere, but also a concern for his brother and a message of state. But that's how it gets even more frustrating. Empress Dowager Sun stopped sobbing and carefully examined Zhu Qiyu, only to find that his face turned pale and his body was weak. Just now, in late autumn, I held on to the stove in my hand and spoke with sincerity and emotion. I couldn't help but let out a sigh in my heart. Perhaps she was suddenly shocked and had too much suspicion in her heart. She has been in charge of the harem for many years and knows very well what kind of temperament this mother and son have. To put it simply, one by one, they are cowardly and dare not have any small thoughts. Putting down the handkerchief in her hand, Empress Dowager Sun looked haggard, as if she couldn't bear to speak. She waved her hand and said, "Let's ask Minister Yu to speak." Yu Qian received the decree and stood up, bowing, saying, "Following the instructions of the Holy Mother, I rested in the mansion at 3/4 of an ugly hour last night. I received a message from the military department's duty officer, and Liang Gui, a resident of Wei Qianhu, was ordered to enter the capital. There is an urgent military situation report. I dare not neglect it, so I immediately rushed to the Ministry of War to summon Liang Gui. The person claimed that, according to the message from Your Majesty's attendant, Colonel Yuan Bin of the Jinui, Xingjia was attacked by bandits at Tutu Fort, and the army was almost destroyed. The Minister of Honor and Qi was almost killed or injured. Fortunately, with the blessings of our ancestors, Xingjia was safe and well, but he had fallen into the hands of bandits. Yuan Bin claimed that under His Majesty's command, Liang Gui was ordered to enter the capital, take 9 dragon pythons, 6 dragon horses, and 6 pearl pallets, 200 taels of gold and 400 taels of silver, and reward the chieftain of the captives with rewards. He welcomed them back to the holy carriage. The matter is of great importance, and I dare not be presumptuous. Therefore, I ordered the Ministry of War to strictly lock the gate, and no one on duty was allowed to enter. I brought military reports and knocked on the palace at night to meet the Queen Mother. Yu Qian's words were spoken calmly and in great detail, and Zhu Qiyu quickly outlined the overall process of the matter in his heart. For a moment, I didn't know how I felt in my heart. The civil engineering incident, Liang Gui's entry into the capital, and the emperor's capture, every piece of evidence has proven that he is not just a big dream, but a real and sincere effort. But if possible, he really hopes everything is in his dreams. The life and death of one person are insignificant, but how can millions of soldiers be let down? After hesitating for a moment, Zhu Qiyu held on to the last glimmer of hope and asked, "This matter is too sensational. Perhaps it was Liang Gui who falsely reported the military situation. Besides, there were countless ministers accompanying the imperial brother, and most of the close attendants, the king, recognized him. However, he had never heard of Yuan Bin or these two people working together to deceive the court. As soon as the words were spoken, all the ministers, including Empress Dowager Sun, raised their heads. They all share the same idea as Zhu Qiyu. How good would it be if two people lied and deceived in this matter? Yu Qian was watched by everyone, frowning heavily and sighing heavily, saying. Empress Dowager Rong reported that although Yuan Bin was not a close attendant, he was indeed on the list of accompanying officials to leave the capital. The Ministry of War had a military report stating that on the 5th day of this month, Yuan Bin was ordered to go on an expedition to the enemy camp and was detained by prisoners. The bandits do not recognize the beauty of heaven. If the Holy Master really falls into the enemy's hands, the bandits will summon those who can distinguish, which is none other than Yuan Bin. If these are all speculative evidence, then Yu Qian's next sentence completely shattered everyone's unrealistic fantasies. Before I entered the palace, the commanding officer Sun Bin, who was stationed at Jiangwan, reported that our army had suffered a great defeat at Tu Fort, with countless deaths and injuries, and that the holy driver was missing. His life and death were unknown. The official army has been sent to search everywhere, and a detailed military report will be submitted after the statistics are completed. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Urgent Tasks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Urgent Tasks. Yu Qian's words made all the courtiers in the palace silent. Although everyone had a rough idea of the situation before Zhu Qiyu arrived, listening again now is still shocking. That's a whole 500,000 people. Even without the conscripted laborers, logistical personnel, and simply capable military personnel, there are still nearly 200,000 people. That's only 100,000 for now. Daning used 3 times the enemy's army, how could he be defeated? Moreover, not only were they defeated, but even the emperor who personally led the expedition was abducted, which is not just a loss of honor for their teachers and the country. Throughout thousands of years of Chinese history, only during the Jingkang period did such incidents occur. But now that things have come to an end, even if one is deeply saddened, they have to put in effort to face it. There is another layer of meaning in what Yu Qian just said. Such a heavy battle with heavy casualties is bound to alarm surrounding military towns to investigate, and Jiangwan is just the first one. Next, detailed military reports from places such as Xuanfu, Datong, Shaanxi, and Zijing will inevitably arrive in the capital one after another. This matter cannot be concealed. Seeing no one speaking, Empress Dowager Sun said, all the officials and workers are the backbone of the country. Before the emperor personally marched, he entrusted the state affairs and politics to everyone. Now that such a great upheaval has occurred, I, as a woman in the deep palace, am panicked and at a loss. I still rely on all the adults to plan and discuss. How should the current situation be good? After a brief pause, Empress Dowager Sun continued, seeing that the ministers were still pondering, if the situation is dangerous like this, it is not a pity for you to remain silent. This is not a court meeting, and if you have any ideas, you can speak for them. Regardless of right or wrong, they are all loyal to the country. If there is anything wrong, I apologize for it. The Empress Dowager's words have all been said here, and it would be inappropriate not to speak anymore. However, in fact, Empress Dowager Sun's concerns were unnecessary. All the people present were important ministers of the 6 ministries, and the least fortunate were also close ministers of the emperor or those guarding the capital. At present, the emperor is heading north, and they are the tall people in the capital. In other words, if the sky falls and hits them on the head, how could they hesitate to speak? It's really amazing that this news has caused these old adults to lose their composure for a while. Fortunately, with Zhu Qiyu making such a fuss when he entered the hall, they were finally given some time to accept it. This gave them a rough idea in their minds. The Minister of Personnel Wang stood up straight and reported, Empress Dowager, the details of this matter are not yet clear, but the general situation can be seen. In my opinion, we will provide compensation for the injured, convict the guilty, and handle other matters temporarily. There are 3 urgent tasks at the moment. First, to inquire about the detailed situation, and to order the nearby guards to submit detailed military reports as soon as possible, gather the remaining soldiers on the spot and escort those who survived along with the nobles and ministers back to the capital as soon as possible for punishment. Secondly, it was ordered that the guards of each pass investigate the fallen area of Your Majesty and wait for an opportunity to welcome him back. At the same time, envoys were dispatched to Vara to investigate the situation. Thirdly, once the bandits have achieved a great victory, they must seize the opportunity to advance. The defense of the capital and border towns is of utmost importance and needs to be reconsidered and arranged in detail. Unlike later generations, although there was already a cabinet at this time, it was only for consultation purposes, and personnel and positions were not yet customized. Although the bill has been drafted, this power has not yet fully formed the system. With the legacy of San Yang, the cabinet's position in the court has slightly improved, but there is still no sense of existence, which can be considered as the lowest power of the Ming dynasty. Since the overthrow of the Central Secretariat by Emperor Taizu, the 6 ministers were the most powerful individuals in the previous dynasty. The Ministry of Personnel was the leader of the 6 ministers, and the Minister of Personnel was known as the Dazhongzai, making him the undisputed leader of all officials today. Therefore, as soon as Mr. Wang spoke, he set the tone for today's meeting. Once the tone is set, we can start discussing. Naturally, the tone and intensity of the 3 urgent tasks proposed by Mr. Wang are also different. The first article is the simplest and most feasible, and it should be understood. Therefore, Mr. Wang's proposal is a detailed solution with little to discuss. This matter belongs to the military department, and at this moment, all military affairs are under the control of Yu Qian. Therefore, Yu Shilang stood up and said. Osaka's words were very accurate. After leaving the palace, he immediately ordered all the border towns to gather the remaining soldiers, submit detailed military reports, and escort the surviving nobles back to the capital. The second point that follows is quite difficult to handle. Mr. Wang spoke very tactfully, but the meaning was actually very simple, discussing how to save the emperor. However, the people present are all experienced strategists, so they naturally know the difficulty of this matter. If the military report brought by Liang Gui is true, then since he has been releasing the detained Jini Wei Colonel Yuan Bin to transmit the message, he must have confirmed who he has caught. Putting oneself in the shoes of others, if one captures the enemy commander on their own side and is still the emperor who personally marches, then it must be closely guarded, placed within the central army, and closely defended. If you want to save someone, it must be even more difficult. After a moment of silence, Chen Sun, a scholar from the Hanlin Academy, approached and said, Empress Dowager, I believe that since the emperor has sent someone to convey the message, it may be appropriate to temporarily approve it. First, Emperor Taizong, has a great influence in the north, and Wala still has a fear of our great Ming. Perhaps he can send an envoy with gold, silver, jade, and silk to welcome His Majesty back. As soon as these words were spoken, all the ministers in the audience secretly sighed. Speaking these words, even Chen Sun himself may not believe it. Taizu, the majesty of Taizong in the northern desert is not bad, but that was more than 20 years ago. After Emperor Renzong and Emperor Xuanzong succeeded to the throne, they both focused their energy on internal affairs. Although it still had a lingering deterrent effect on the northern invaders, there were often border troubles as early as the time of the former emperor, but they were not serious. Since ascending to the throne and practicing the throne, due to the young and weak nature of the emperor, the main focus of the court's governance has been on appeasement. If it is not possible to provoke border conflicts, it will not provoke border conflicts, which further increases the courage of the rebels. Moreover, in more than 20 years, the Ming dynasty had already replaced 3 generations of emperors, and the same was true for the Wara, Tatar, and other tribes. The old generation of chieftains who had witnessed the military power of Emperor Taizong gradually declined, while the new generation of chieftains, due to the repeated tolerance of the Ming dynasty, acted recklessly. If it were so simple to welcome the emperor back, how dare we raise 100,000 soldiers and provoke disputes? However, the courtiers also know that this is the only method with a slightly higher success rate at present, and it may be even more difficult to rely on the border generals to find opportunities to rescue them. Therefore, we had to bow and agree. This is a mature plan, accurate. Empress Dowager Sun nodded and gave Chen Sun a approving glance. She thought to herself that being a servant was indeed more reliable, and after some thought, she said again. This matter needs to be done as soon as possible. Last night, the military report arrived in Beijing, and the AI family and Empress conducted a thorough inventory in the inner treasury. They have prepared the gold and silver python robe according to the emperor's instructions. After discussing with everyone, please send someone to deliver it as soon as possible. Although Chen Sun held the title of Right Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, he actually worked in the Hanlin Academy. Compared to the 6 ministers, the Hanlin Academy was considered a vassal and relied more on divine grace. Seeing the Empress Dowager's expression, it was evident that he had hit the nail on the Empress Dowager's head, so he continued, "What the Empress Dowager said is quite true. This matter cannot be delayed. In my opinion, it is not advisable to send Liang Gui back. Firstly, his duty is to bring in Wei Qianhu, familiarize himself with the situation, and secondly, he will be more able to gain trust with Wawa." After thinking for a moment, Empress Dowager Sun spoke up and asked, "What do the courtiers think?" Having set the general direction for sending envoys, it doesn't matter who to send over. To return to justice is probably to send some gold and silver, convey a message, and not hold any hope of welcoming back the emperor. Therefore, all the officials bow down and say, "Good." So this matter was also settled. Immediately after, the Sun.in.Law Captain Jiao Jing stood up and said, "Empress Dowager, I believe that in this critical situation, we should demote talents without any restrictions. We can order the Ministry of War to make a public announcement. Anyone who has a strategy to retreat from the enemy inside or outside the capital and welcomes Your Majesty's plan can be conscripted on an exceptional basis and then appointed." This is another insightful suggestion. To put it simply, take a chance. Although there are many people inside and outside the capital, if there were such cunning individuals who had already been summoned by the court, why wait until now? You should know that before the emperor went on an expedition, he had already recruited many talented and extraordinary individuals. Now, even his bones may be cold in the civil fortress. So, this suggestion is just nonsense. Little did he know that Jiao Jing also complained incessantly. As a member of the military officials of Xuanqi, he was well aware of Xuanqi's current situation. Although the emperor was instigated by Wang Zhen during this expedition, there was inevitably a push from influential families behind it. Both the Empress Dowager and the adults in the palace are well aware of this. After all, as a distinguished military official, only by constantly fighting can one maintain their position. Over the past 20 years, the world has been at peace, with weakened military equipment. In addition, the former Empress Dowager and the 3 Yang officials have repeatedly suppressed the noble families. I finally encountered such a big battle, but to my surprise, such a thing happened. Now that the Vara army is under pressure, it goes without saying that after this storm is over, there is no need to think about it. Those civil officials will definitely take this opportunity to criticize Sun Qi. At this point, being able to earn a good impression in front of the Empress Dowager will make the situation better in the future. Unfortunately, in this great war, all the nobles had high hopes. Most of the people in the capital who can be called by name are accompanying them on their expeditions, even the Dinghai Divine Needle in Xuanqi, the important minister entrusted by the late emperor, and the elderly British Duke have followed them. If he wins, everyone will be happy, but in the current situation, he is just a Sun.in.Law captain without even a title, and there is no room for intervention in this palace. Even though he knew what he was saying was nonsense, he still insisted on speaking. At the very least, it is important to express one's attitude that the elite and relatives in the capital are still trying to find a way to save the emperor and make up for their mistakes. This can be considered a job for the Ministry of War, so Empress Dowager Sun turned to Yu Qian and asked, "What do you think of Yu Shilang?" Admittedly, this suggestion is unlikely to be of much use, but there is also no room for error. Yu Qian didn't hesitate much and said, "I think it's feasible." So, the second matter was temporarily agreed upon. The remaining is the third most important and thorny matter. Beijing, what should we do? End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Zhu Qiyu and His Person. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Zhu Qiyu and His Person. If we want to talk about the current situation in the capital, we have to mention several capital relocations in the early Ming dynasty. When the Ming dynasty was established, it followed the instructions of the founding emperor and established its capital in Nanjing. Nanjing is located in the fertile land of Jiangnan, which is easy to defend but difficult to attack, making it a prime location for the capital city. After Emperor Taizong's reign of Emperor Jingnan, he was a horse emperor with a strong and courageous personality, and a grand and strategic heart. In addition, the Jingnan incident has caused much criticism from Emperor Taizong, and he needs to use great achievements to quell rumors. So he waited multiple times and believed that the bandits outside the border were still a major concern for the court. He decided to personally attack the northern desert, and Nanjing was too far from the border, which was too costly to mobilize the army and not conducive to border defense and controlling the court after the expedition. In addition, due to various considerations such as dissatisfaction with the extravagant atmosphere of Jinling and balancing the power of the old aristocrats during the reign of Emperor Taizu, Emperor Taizong ultimately decided to move the capital to Beijing. When Emperor Renzong ascended the throne and the northern desert was peaceful, the court needed to rest and recuperate. As the capital city, Beijing's economic shortcomings were evident. In addition, Emperor Renzong had been residing in Nanjing for a long time, so he repeatedly intended to relocate the capital back to Nanjing. He even issued an edict to use Beijing as the capital and renovate the Nanjing Palace, making many preparations for the relocation. Unfortunately, Emperor Renzong did not have a holiday in heaven and only managed to control the extreme for a year. Before it could be implemented, he passed away. At the time of the late emperor, this matter fell into a stalemate. On the one hand, Emperor Renzong was the father of the late emperor, and there was a posthumous edict ordering the late emperor to return the capital to Nanjing. Out of filial piety, the late emperor did not want to disobey. On the other hand, the former emperor grew up under the reign of Emperor Taizong from a young age and had a desire for meritorious deeds in his heart, so he was more inclined to take Beijing as his capital. As a result, during the reign of the late emperor, this matter was temporarily put on hold. Beijing was still a nominal capital, but all aspects of palace construction, defense, and political management were transferred to Beijing, which had already become the actual national capital. Until now, when he ascended the throne, an edict was officially issued to determine the status of Beijing as the capital city. However, during this expedition, Beijing's biggest weakness as the capital city was once again exposed. That's because it's too close to the border. Although it is so easy to mobilize a large army and control the court situation, once there is a danger, it is a big deal. Apart from anything else, if the current capital city of Nanjing, even in terms of personal expenses, the leaders of the 6 tribes have sufficient reasons to stop the emperor, how could this great disaster be caused? On the other hand, in reality, the capital city of Beijing is indeed easy to control the border, but on the other hand, it is relatively easy for the enemy to cross the border and approach the capital directly. Just like now, the troops are advancing straight towards Xuanfu, only a few hundred miles away from Beijing. Just cross the Great Wall and drive straight in, all the way to the outskirts of Beijing. If the capital is also captured, the Ming dynasty will immediately be engulfed in flames, falling apart and facing the risk of a collapse of the country. So at this moment, how to reorganize the defense of the capital is of utmost importance. In comparison, even the safety of the emperor is slightly inferior. To say a disrespectful word, even if the emperor is buried in an enemy country and there are successors to the Ming dynasty, if the capital is also captured and the country is not a country, how can the emperor come? All the people present are clear-minded, and this matter is the most urgent and difficult to handle at present. If there is a slight mistake, they are the criminals who caused the collapse of the Ming dynasty. So for a moment, the hall fell silent again. After a brief pause, Empress Dowager Sun suddenly said, "I am aware that this matter is of great significance. As a woman in the harem, I have been working hard to take care of it. Before the emperor left the capital, I ordered the King of Heaven to stay behind. At this time, it was the time when the royal family and ministers worked together to resist the crisis. Why did the King of Heaven remain silent?" Zhu Qiyu was momentarily stunned. In her past life, Empress Dowager Sun never challenged him. Could it be that many things have changed because of his rebirth? Without careful consideration, Zhu Qiyu spoke up and said, "Empress Dowager, forgive me. This matter is indeed too significant, and I have no good plan for the time being." The ministers present thought that the king could speak up and say two useful words, but they never expected him to be so honest. Yes, this young prince has always been low-key and has a weak personality. Otherwise, the emperor would not have trusted him to stay in the capital to supervise the country. However, before they could express any further sighs, they heard Zhu Qiyu speak again. "However, since I bear the trust of my elder brother, in this critical moment, I will do my best. I believe that the key to this matter lies in whether we can protect the capital. You two, Yu Shilang and Jiao Fuma, will oversee the defense of the capital while the other will temporarily be in charge of the Ministry of War. Can you give me some information on how many officials and soldiers I have left behind to defend the capital?" As the words fell, Empress Dowager Sun's gaze twisted, seemingly unintentionally casting her gaze on Zhu Qiyu. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she didn't say anything more. After all, she asked first. Moreover, in theory, she is already a woman in the harem and is not suitable to directly express her opinions on court politics. But Zhu Qiyu was the prince appointed by the emperor to oversee the country before leaving the capital. Although most of the time he could not decide anything, he should be in charge of such discussions on court affairs. Yu Qian was named and immediately stepped out of the line, but did not immediately speak up. Instead, he carefully calculated. However, the Sun.in.Law Captain Jiao Jing didn't hesitate much and said, "Our army in the capital camp originally had more than 200,000 official troops. This time, the emperor personally launched an expedition, and due to the urgency of the situation, many of them were drawn from the capital camp. Currently, there are about 70,000 remaining official troops in the three major camps in the city, including craftsmen and logistical personnel. If we consider those who can fight, there should be 50,000 to 60,000. The atmosphere in the room immediately sank. Although everyone knew that the situation was critical, they did not expect it to be so critical. In the grand capital, there are only 50 to 60,000 people available for mobilization. The emperor personally commanded more than 200,000 troops, twice the strength of Yexian's army, and still suffered a disastrous defeat. Now that the official army in Beijing is less than half of the enemy's, how should we fight this battle? At this moment, Yu Qian also calculated the number of soldiers and said, "There are about 50,000 to 60,000 soldiers on the side of the Beijing camp, but in addition, our 9 gate patrol officers in the capital should have 7 to 8,000 people, along with the remaining officers in Jili and the grain transport officers from Nanjing, all of them should be used to guard the capital. There should be 100,000 soldiers who can fight." 100,000, this number barely gives people a sense of security, at least roughly equivalent to the enemy. However, even so, the palace was still filled with melancholy. After all, more than 200,000 troops have been defeated. Even if there is 100,000 now, is it really enough? At this moment, the Hanlin attendant Su Xian stood out and said, "I would like to inform the Holy Mother and Prince that I have risked my life to hear about it. For several days, our capital has been plagued by rapid winds and rain, with unstable stars and chaotic celestial phenomena. The calendar is unknown, and now there are also civil engineering projects. It is evident that the fate has passed, and I have risked my life to speak. In such times of danger, only moving south can alleviate the difficulties. I implore the Holy Mother to think twice." Zhu Qiyu's expression slightly darkened. Su Qian is really an interesting person. To live a lifetime, if he hates anyone the most. That is naturally the few who planned and participated in the restoration of the Southern Palace. Coincidentally, Su Gui was one of them, but at that time, he had already changed his name to Su Yozhen. This person was a successful candidate in the 8th year of the Xuande reign, with a lot of wisdom and good achievements, but it has to be said that he is a practical person. In addition to being proficient in the classics, Confucianism, and literature, there has also been extensive research on astronomy, geography, military tactics, and water conservancy. But Zhu Qiyu thought he was interesting, but he didn't mean that. Reviving a lifetime, there are still many things that are different from what I remember. In his past life, he did not suffer from this serious illness, but instead served his country according to his divine mandate. Although he doesn't have much real power, he must have been the first to know about major events like civil engineering in military newspapers. So in the previous life, the first time Yu Qian received a military report, he immediately found the sun.in.law Captain Jiao Jing, who was in charge of the defense of the capital, and him, the prince of the country. Then the three of them joined forces to report to the palace, and Empress Dowager Sun never directly summoned the ministers in the Fengtian Hall. After receiving the news, she prepared wealth, silk, gold, and silver on one hand, and on the other hand, according to the rules, ordered the King of Heaven to convene ministers to discuss strategies and ultimately report to her. But in this life, because he was so sick that he couldn't get up for days. Without realizing that he had already woken up, Yu Qian rushed to power and went directly to the palace to report, which led to Empress Dowager Sun summoning the ministers directly. He accidentally intervened and created the current situation. So, this creates an awkward question, which is who should be in charge of this hall. The three urgent tasks proposed by Mr. Wang, the first and second of which are barely related to the emperor. As the birth mother of the emperor, and there is nothing controversial about the matter, Empress Dowager Sun can decide for herself. But this third item truly involves the country and the country. It has little to do with the safety of the harem or even the emperor, and belongs to pure court affairs. So the question arises. According to the rules, it is more legitimate for the king of the holy mandate to preside over this matter. But the ministers present all no. In fact, the one who truly holds real power in the capital is the Empress Dowager sitting on the throne. After reading the military report and entering the palace, the Empress Dowager can immediately observe the martial law of the 9 gates. To put it bluntly, the Prince of Qi has a great sense of righteousness, but the Empress Dowager holds real power. So the question of who to report the matter to becomes a big one. If it weren't for Zhu Qiyu's illness, then naturally, just like in her previous life, Empress Dowager Sun wouldn't have appeared on this occasion at all, and he should have taken charge. If it weren't for Zhu Qiyu rushing into the palace to see Empress Dowager Xian, then the courtiers wouldn't have hesitated and would have reported it directly to the Empress Dowager who could make the decision. Unfortunately, now that both of them are present, this awkward situation has arisen. Just now, Empress Dowager Sun also realized this, and because she took the initiative to ask Zhu Qiyu a question, she could only let Zhu Qiyu have the say. But the ministers in the palace are all clear in their hearts. So whether it's Jiao Jing or Yu Qian, their words are all ambiguous. Although there was no concealment of the specific situation, it was not clear to whom it was reported. But as soon as Su Yen spoke, he straightforwardly said, "Report to the Holy Mother, Prince." In the end, he simply threw away Zhu Qiyu and said, "Please think twice about the Holy Mother." Although at this critical juncture, no one would pursue such a small mistake. But often the more such details, the more they can show a person's true nature. In his past life, Zhu Qiyu had never had such an opportunity, nor did he have such an eye for people. But 7 years of the emperor and 100 years of ups and downs in the world have allowed him to develop a pair of fiery eyes and golden eyes. With just this one detail, he can conclude. This Su Yen has no sense of propriety, law, or righteousness in his heart, only interests and fame. For him, reputation and etiquette are not worth mentioning at all. He only values real power and benefits. However, as soon as he spoke these words, the others had not yet reacted. Eunuch Jining, who was standing beside him and holding a pen, immediately stood up and said in a stern voice, "Bold. Do you want to disrupt the court order of my ancestors with such heartfelt words? Seeking collections, seeking recommendations." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Discussion on Southward Migration. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 8. The Prince of the Lost Country. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. The Prince of the Lost Country Zhu Qiyu sat aside and couldn't help but sigh when she saw Empress Dowager Sun's expression still hesitating a bit. After all, they are the generation who have lived in the deep palace for a long time. Although he has a deep mind and favors the 6 palaces alone, he has not truly participated in court affairs and his political sensitivity is too low. No wonder when the late emperor left, he would rather entrust himself to the late Empress Dowager than let Empress Dowager Sun govern. He has been a person for 2 generations, so it's natural to see. Empress Dowager Sun still had some agreement in her heart with the proposal of moving south. But why didn't she think about it? She was afraid. Did all the ministers and Jining present who were firmly opposed really have no fear in their hearts? Since everyone is against this matter, there is naturally a reason why the capital cannot be relocated. But although she doesn't like this woman, Zhu Qiyu also knows. In such a critical moment, national righteousness outweighs personal grievances. After careful consideration, he spoke up. I believe that the proposal of moving south is not feasible. This statement is very clear and also in line with Zhu Qiyu's consistent style of following Xiao Gui and Qiao Sui. Although the courtiers present were slightly surprised by the decisiveness of the king, they also felt relieved. But just when everyone thought Zhu Qiyu would stop talking, his voice rang out again without hesitation. Our Lady Rong reports that our country has been established for decades during the Ming dynasty. Although our military equipment has been slightly weakened in recent years, the number of available officers and soldiers is not less than 1 million. And there are nearly 300,000 soldiers stationed in the capital camp alone. Although we suffered a major defeat and the army was overthrown, the majority of the casualties were soldiers from the capital camp. The garrisons that could be mobilized in the court and the officers and soldiers guarding various regions were unharmed. Although they were severely injured, they were far from the disaster of collapse. Zhu Qiyu spoke slowly, but his tone was firm. He is very clear in his heart. The more at this time, the more turbulent the people's hearts are, the more one must unite. Ultimately, most of the real power in the capital is still in the hands of Empress Dowager Sun. If she is always eager and unable to firmly fight, it will inevitably bring many unnecessary troubles. He cannot be certain whether what happened in his past life will still be the same in this life. At least for now, it seems that some things have changed because he has lived a lifetime again. At this critical moment, any unexpected incident could potentially result in a vastly different outcome. Therefore, regardless of the considerations, Zhu Qiyu must completely dispel Empress Dowager Sun's concerns. Zhu Qiyu's words also caught Yu Qian's eye and he couldn't help but speak up. What the prince said is quite true. Empress Dowager, our Ming army has a permanent force of 1.5 million. However, due to the division of our garrisons, we have not been able to mobilize them. However, the officials and armies of all regions are loyal to the Ming dynasty. If we issue an edict, we will be able to use our strength. With the unity of our officials, we can definitely alleviate the danger in the capital. However, his words made Chen Sun, a scholar from the Hanlin Academy, frown and say. Yu Shilang's words are indeed reasonable, but it is necessary to consider that local town armies should not be easily mobilized, otherwise civil unrest and uprisings will be uncontrollable. Quanlu River Miao bandits, Southwest chieftains, and Zhejiang rebellions all require a large army to defend. The specific number of troops that our Ming dynasty can mobilize still needs to be considered. Furthermore, if the army is to be divided into different regions and transferred to the capital, the distance of the journey, the supply of food and supplies, the corvée of the people, and the preparation of the army need to be considered. Yu Qian was a bit hesitant for a moment. He was indeed a bit anxious just now, only thinking about how to persuade the Empress Dowager. However, When he heard the clear and organized words of the Prince of Tang, he didn't think much and spoke up. Unexpectedly, it caught Chen Sun's attention. He is a sincere person and generally does not speak falsely. Let him confidently say now that he can definitely mobilize a large army, he really dares not. After determining the overall direction, it is necessary to discuss this matter in detail. It is absolutely unacceptable to speak big. And Chen Sun's 2 reasons are indeed valid. The capital is indeed in great danger. But we cannot abandon other places just because the capital is in danger. Although Vara is a hidden danger to Ming, it is not his only enemy. In recent years, chieftains have rebelled, and the Southwest Miao bandits have also been restless. Rebellions have also occurred frequently in Zhejiang and other areas. Where can we draw troops, where cannot we draw troops, and if so, how many troops should we draw? These all require careful consideration, taking into account all aspects. So for a moment, he didn't dare to open this mouth recklessly. Zhu Qiyu watched from the side, but her heart was mixed with laughter and tears. He was actually surprised by Yu Qian's hasty intrusion into the conversation. To put it simply, Yu Qian was a bit impulsive just now, and it was not quite appropriate when speaking. And just now, he sternly reprimanded Su Xian, although his reasoning was good, his tone was too harsh. As the head of the Hanlin Academy, Chen Sun was scolded and couldn't hold his face, so he must have been unhappy. Therefore, it is normal to seek such an opportunity, choke on humility, and win back a city. Speaking of which, in his past life, he was very neat and thoughtful when communicating with Emperor Yu Qian and his ministers, but such scenes were rare. But now it's not the time to think about these things. Although recognizing Yu Qian's abilities, Zhu Qiyu had to say that his remarks were not timely. Chen Sun's rebuttal added a touch of worry to Empress Dowager Sun's previously calm expression. Helpless, Zhu Qiyu had no choice but to continue speaking. What Professor Chen said is not without reason, but in any case, our local officials and troops are not completely immovable. Not to mention anything else, in the northern and southern regions of Zhili, the official troops in the capital region were constantly on guard, and they could be mobilized from different regions. Depending on the distance of the road, the situation in the area they were stationed in would also vary. This matter could be further discussed by the Ministry of War, and ultimately there would be no shortage of troops to be mobilized. Therefore, our defense of the capital is not to win the battle against Naya first, but to prioritize defense and rely on various passes and cities to defend. In this way, the pressure on our court can be slightly eased. Furthermore, we must first engage in expeditions, which are difficult to sustain in terms of logistics. Our army is mainly composed of cavalry, and the terrain outside the pass is favorable. However, if we enter the pass, our Ming dynasty will be able to defeat its sharpness everywhere. Therefore, I believe that the Empress Dowager does not need to worry too much. This conclusion sounds much more reassuring. At least after Empress Dowager Sun finished listening, her hanging heart was mostly relieved. She had the intention of moving south in her heart, but it was only because she saw that the situation was already strong, with over 200,000 officers and soldiers suffering a major defeat. Currently, there were less than 100,000 officers and soldiers in the capital, and she was afraid that she would not be able to defend it. But she didn't expect that the situation was different now. The emperor personally commanded over 200,000 troops to go on an expedition in order to win the battle. But although they only have 100,000 people, they only need to remain unbeaten and procrastinate. Although she has lived in the Deep Palace for a long time, she also knows that Daming's family background is relatively thick. If we say that she can first compete with the millions of officials and soldiers of the entire Daming with less than 100,000 people, she does not believe it. No big deal, let's give up some unimportant chieftain rebellions for now and bring more officials and troops over. Of course, she would definitely not say such words. As soon as Zhu Qiyu saw the heat approaching, she knew it was time to unleash her ultimate moves. The previous words were all to boost Empress Dowager Sun's confidence and make her believe that the court had the ability to defend the capital, but they did not truly dispel her desire to move south. After all, no matter how confident you are, it doesn't prevent you from leaving an extra path for yourself. But ultimately, she lacked political vision, and what she didn't understand was, this back road is absolutely unacceptable. You should know that among all the people in this palace who should oppose the southward migration the most is Empress Dowager Sunday. Unfortunately, she didn't see it as clearly as Jining, and she still hasn't understood it until now. If this point is not clearly stated, it may be difficult for Empress Dowager Sun to make up her mind and firmly defend the capital. I understand that at this moment, everyone in our capital will be in a state of anxiety. However, just now, all the adults have spoken. The capital is a precious place that cannot be abandoned, and it can also be defended. It all depends on the unity of our court and people. Therefore, if the proposal of moving south is discussed together, it will be difficult for both inside and outside the capital to work together, causing panic among the people, and the local government and army will also be ineffective. At that time, even if we have a strong sense of defense, we are afraid of recurrence. If there is any disharmony in the capital due to the different thoughts of the upper and lower levels, even if we move south, it will still be like the events of the Song dynasty, but the Holy Mother will always consider it. Zhu Qiyu said it quite tactfully, but in fact, what she meant was, if we stick to it with one heart and one mind, we are likely to be able to hold on. But if one's heart is unstable and sways left and right, then it's uncertain what unexpected things will happen. When the matter of Jingtai comes to light, please take your time. Empress Dowager Sun is not a fool. Of course she understood Zhu Qiyu's words. It was only when he understood that his heart was startled, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He turned his gaze to Jining, who had initially opposed the southward migration. She just realized at this moment what a big mistake she almost made just now. Upon seeing this situation, Jining understood that the Empress Dowager had already figured it out and whispered, Empress Dowager, the current situation is as dangerous as a pile of eggs. The Emperor has fallen into the hands of bandits. If the capital is lost again, the disaster of the collapse of the country will be inflicted on the Emperor. The matter of moving south must never be done. Yes, that's the reason why Jining strongly opposed Su Jinang's proposal. It is also something that the ministers have been wanting to mention since entering the palace, but dare not say much. How to characterize the changes in civil engineering? Undoubtedly, the collapse of the army, the deaths and injuries of the nobles and ministers, and even the capture of the emperor by the bandits are already a situation that cannot be worse. However, this also depends on what situation to compare with. If compared to the achievements of previous emperors who repeatedly went on expeditions and shook the world, such a situation would be a great shame. But compared to the disaster of national downfall, these are nothing. The capital can be defended, but the civil engineering incident is just a defeat. Even if this defeat, the price paid by Daming is extremely heavy, it is just a defeat. But if the capital is lost and forced to move south, it will inevitably lead to the rise of war and the disaster of national downfall within the pass. At its best, it would be in a relatively peaceful corner similar to the Southern Song dynasty. Everyone present at that time, one by one, they will all be labeled as sinners in history books. The first to bear the brunt is the legitimate emperor who insisted on personally attacking, but ultimately suffered a great defeat and did not return. Also the only biological son of Empress Dowager Sun, Zhu Qiyu. Who can afford the title of the fallen ruler? Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a recommendation vote, please vote first. 5 or 10 tickets are not too many, and 1 or 2 tickets are not too few. New books require votes to make it to the top. Thank you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Proposal for the establishment of the Crown Prince. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Proposal for the establishment of the Crown Prince. Empress Dowager Sun sat in the palace, sweating profusely from her forehead. Her jade hand, hidden under her sleeve and robe, had already left a deep mark. Jin Ying's words made her truly realize what a serious situation I am currently facing. The ruler of the fallen country. The mere appearance of these 4 words in her heart made her dizzy and almost paralyzed on the spot. Taking a deep breath and barely calming her mind, Empress Dowager Sun spoke up. There is no need to discuss this matter again. As Yu Qian said, at such a critical moment, who dares to say that those who move south will be beheaded? Due to the seriousness of this matter, even Empress Dowager Sun herself was not aware of it. When she said these 2 words, her voice was trembling. Zhu Qiyu breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that Empress Dowager Sun had already realized the seriousness of the matter. So he stood up first and spoke. I solemnly obey the orders of the Holy Mother, and from today on, those who dare to move south will be beheaded. The ministers below also stood up and echoed in agreement. The Empress Dowager is wise. Of course, among these people, except for one person. That's Su Qian. He naturally did not hear Jin Ying's whispers. But seeing Empress Dowager Sun's sudden decline in attitude. Carefully savor the implied meaning in the words of the king just now. Su Qian's mind is filled with 2 words. It's over. Not only did he offend both the civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty, but even the Empress Dowager in the palace probably wouldn't have any good feelings for him anymore. After all, he almost unintentionally committed a great crime that no one could afford for the emperor. For a moment, Su Qian felt that his future was hopeless. I deeply regret why I spoke too much. However, at this point, no one in the palace cared about Su Qian's performance. Because Empress Dowager Sun's voice has already continued to ring. I work together, and the capital will surely be defended. Yu Shilang is in charge of various affairs of the Ministry of War. After leaving the palace today, he immediately appointed a military inspector and came up with a method to submit to the court for deliberation. Empress Dowager Sun said it was ordinary. But the atmosphere in the hall became subtle again. Because with this sentence, another real problem has been brought to the forefront. Who is in charge of the current situation? As mentioned earlier. Nowadays, in the capital, the Empress Dowager holds most of the real power and can mobilize the garrison of the capital camp and the 9 gates. However, in reality, it is the king who is appointed to oversee the country. Just now, although there was someone like Su Ting, who couldn't put his position clearly, he lifted a lid. But because Zhu Qiyu took a step back. He took the initiative to speak up and report it to the Empress Dowager, which temporarily concealed this contradiction. The Empress Dowager's words. But it brought this matter to the forefront once again. Undoubtedly, Empress Dowager Sun's words were impeccable and indeed what needs to be done now. But be aware. Yu Qian was an important minister of the 6 ministries and a serious former minister. Unless it involves royal affairs. Otherwise. According to the rules, the Empress Dowager cannot directly issue an edict to court officials. This kind of rule and procedural thing. Wen Qin values more than Sun Qi. To put it more seriously. If the program is not correct, it will be chaotic. The courtiers can completely refuse to accept. So everyone's gaze fell on Yu Qian. Take it or not take it. Accepting this imperial edict represents assuming that Empress Dowager Sun can intervene in government affairs, which violates the law and etiquette. But if you don't answer, how should you refuse? Just now, these courtiers kept shouting to make the Empress Dowager firm in her confidence and defend the capital. Now the Empress Dowager has complied with their wishes, but they are constantly entangled in such small matters. Zhu Qiyu watched from the side and guessed roughly the intentions of Empress Dowager Sun in her heart. She is an elderly person, although her plan to move south has been dispelled. But I still want to hold on to things in my own hands. It has been some time since I went on a personal expedition today. Empress Dowager Sun has always adhered to her duties in the palace. What should be intervened in and what should not be intervened in, the degree in between is very precise. She couldn't be unclear about what her noble decree meant. On the contrary, she is taking this opportunity to test the attitude of the courtiers. Unfortunately, she picked the wrong person. Yu Qian took a step forward and kowtowed, saying, "Our Lady wrong, the previous emperor personally led a military expedition and ordered the King of Heaven to oversee the country. Unfortunately, the emperor has fallen into the hands of bandits, and the affairs in the capital cannot be neglected for long. I risked my life to advise and request that the lady issue an edict to appoint the King of Heaven to oversee the affairs and supervise the officials." A faint smile flashed in Zhu Qiyu's eyes. This is Yu Qian. He won't be afraid of any threats or temptations, he will only do things according to his own beliefs. Empress Dowager Sun's probing, if it were someone else, she might still be hesitant. But when it comes to Yu Qian, there's no need to think too much. Since the program is not correct, then make the program legal. The reason for such an awkward situation now. It is because the king of the underworld has the name of overseeing the country, but has no authority over overseeing the country. Empress Dowager Sun holds great power in the capital, but she has no reputation for interfering in government affairs. After all, any intervention by the Empress Dowager in government affairs must be authorized by the emperor. The current situation is that the emperor is caught in an enemy, barely comparable to the weakness of the emperor, unable to handle political affairs. However, similarly, because the emperor was not in the capital, Empress Dowager Sun could not have obtained the emperor's imperial decree authorization. Even in times of crisis, it is impossible for courtiers to accept the presence of the female protagonist. So the best solution at the moment is to allow the King of the Sea to truly exercise the power of overseeing the country. He thought so, so he said so. After finishing speaking, Empress Dowager Sun's face suddenly changed without any concern. Empress Dowager Sun's expression was indeed not very attractive. She already had this expectation in her heart. But I didn't expect Yu Qian to push her back so directly. You should know, Yu Qian's words just now were basically a slap in the face. I didn't pay any attention to her orders at all, but was talking to myself. In other words, her edict was directly ignored. There was no rejection, but at the same time, it was not mentioned, and it was assumed that nothing had happened. This is more uncomfortable for her than directly rejecting her decree. For a moment, Empress Dowager Sun was so angry that her chest heaved and her face turned pale. Seeing this, Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but feel a secret joy in her heart. Several times in his past and present life, but for the first time, he saw Empress Dowager Sun being so angry. Although he knew he shouldn't gloat, he couldn't help it. But to put it another way, this also shows that Empress Dowager Sun's political determination was insufficient. This kind of thing is simply not too common in the court. Not to mention, this is just a decree that cannot even be considered a verbal edict. It is the true edict that ministers will not pay too much attention to it until the procedure is truly completed and issued to the 6 departments. After all, court affairs are decided by everyone through consultation, and there is no reason for one person to make a decision with one word. Moreover, what Yu Qian is currently facing is not a serious emperor. So when he refused, he simply had no burden at all. Empress Dowager Sun scanned for a week. Seeing no courtier come forward to accuse Yu Qian of wrongdoing, I realized that my recent actions were too reckless. Pressing down her anger, Empress Dowager Sun felt a headache. Is it like this to hand over the regency power to the king? She secretly glanced at the sickly Zhu Qiyu sitting in the nearby chair. I always feel a bit uncomfortable in my heart. Especially after seeing Zhu Qiyu analyze the situation so calmly and systematically just now. Empress Dowager Sun felt even more uneasy. After thinking for a moment, Empress Dowager Sun asked, "Your Majesty, Yu Qian has advised that the AI family entrust the affairs of the court to you. What do you think?" I sit and watch Zhu Qiyu muttered inwardly, but still stood up and said, "Holy Mother, such a big matter should be decided by all the ministers and Holy Mother after careful consideration. I dare not speak too much. At this moment, he's not going to make any fuss. Although there have been slight changes in the past and present situations. But he believed that with those words just now, all the ministers present should have a clear understanding of who can truly take control of the capital. Moreover, in the eyes of these officials who adhere to the rules, it is impossible to allow an Empress Dowager without imperial decree to directly intervene in politics. The ball was kicked back, and Empress Dowager's son couldn't help but rub her forehead. She felt more and more that this young king was different from before. These two sentences may seem ordinary, but in reality, they imply cleverness. Zhu Qiyu seemed to have said nothing, but he left a note. He didn't say yes or no, but rather asked her to discuss with the ministers. So that is to say, she will definitely ask the courtiers present next. But ask them. Looking at Yu Qian's taken for granted expression, Empress Dowager's son didn't need to think to know what they were going to say. After a brief moment of hesitation, Empress Dowager's son decided not to listen to those things she didn't want to hear and said directly. Before leaving the capital, the emperor once told the Ai family that after the great victory returned to the capital, he would appoint a crown prince on a certain day. Now that the emperor has fallen to the enemy, the people in the capital are afraid and anxious, and the court cannot be left without a leader for a day. The intention of mourning the family is to instruct the Ministry of Rights to choose an auspicious day and appoint the eldest brother Jian Shen as the crown prince, in order to ensure the peace of the world. Before the emperor returned to the capital, he was responsible for the affairs of the commoners and was supervised and assisted by the king. What do you think? Perhaps Empress Dowager's son is a bit tired. Lazy enough to play any more tricks, he directly expressed his own meaning. The first few sentences were naturally ignored by the courtiers. What the emperor said before leaving the capital is just a starting point, the focus is on the following two sentences. Appoint the crown prince, to pacify the hearts of the world. What's the peace of mind? Of course, if the emperor cannot return, how should the courtiers stand in line, and to whom should the officials, soldiers, and people be loyal? In addition, another sentence is also very thought-provoking. When Yu Qian gave his advice, he said, appoint the Prince of Qi to take charge of major affairs. When she arrived at the Empress Dowager's place, she became the appointed king to supervise the country and assist in politics. One chief photographer and one assistant politician. The difference between these two is quite significant. The meaning of Yu Qian is to entrust all the power of the capital to the hands of the king, who will be in charge of everything. The meaning of Empress Dowager's son is to first establish the crown prince, then entrust the great power of the capital to the crown prince, and finally have the crown prince exercise the power on his behalf. It seems like there's no difference, it's just a missing program, and in the end, it's always the King of Heaven who comes to oversee. But those who are slightly politically sensitive are aware that these two can be vastly different. The biggest difference lies in rank. If we follow Yu Qian's approach, then the power of the capital itself is in the hands of the king. Unless the emperor returns, no one can seize power from the hands of the king. But if we follow Empress Dowager's son's approach, it will be different. Power belongs to the crown prince, while the crown prince is only a political assistant. So we can switch people. Although royal relatives are the most suitable candidates for political assistance, high-ranking officials, civil and military officials can also assist in politics. In this way, it will be much easier to overthrow the power of the King of Han. The ministers present were all those who had been in the officialdom for many years, but it was also the first time they had encountered such a situation. Although I understood the difference in a moment of thought, how to express myself was a challenge. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The Way of the Mean. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Way of the Mean. It should be said that Empress Dowager's son's meaning has already been expressed very clearly. At this time, the establishment of the crown prince is to ensure the inheritance of the throne. In other words, once the emperor has something to do, the one who ascends to the throne must be the emperor's son, the little doll who is about to be crowned as the crown prince. Although she is in the deep palace, she is not a fool. Although after entering the palace, no one dared to mention it, or even show any hint of meaning. But there is still a problem that everyone has to face. So, what if the emperor doesn't come back? This is not an unfounded concern, but a real threat. No matter what they say to the outside world, whether they fall into the hands of bandits or go north hunting, everyone present knows in their hearts. The fact is, the emperor was captured. Explain the white dots again. A small life is held in someone's hand. Although for now, as long as you have a little bit of brain, you dare not take action against the emperor. But what if the emperor is alone in the enemy camp, in case of any accidents? Or, could we first hold the emperor hostage and imprison him for several years or even more? Take another step back. If he were to wait for the price and offer any conditions that are simply unacceptable. For example, declaring allegiance and paying tribute, abandoning the capital, and so on. What should I do? These are the worst-case scenarios, but no one dares to speak up at this time. After all, the emperor has just had an accident, and detailed military reports have not yet been transmitted. If these words are openly spoken, wouldn't it be a curse on the emperor? But not saying it doesn't mean you won't think. As the group closest to the power center of the Ming dynasty, all the ministers present knew it well. Embrace the greatest hope and prepare for the worst. So, it involves another crucial issue. Once their worries come true, what should be done for the succession of the throne? In theory, the emperor has a son. Although he is only a 2-year-old child, there should be no hesitation in the so-called orderly inheritance and the righteousness of etiquette and law. However, the principles of propriety in law must ultimately be emphasized on the premise of preserving the country and the country. If the country collapses and the country is not here, what rules should we follow? In the current situation, the country needs a ruler who can shoulder heavy responsibilities and be trusted by the court and the people, not a weaned baby. The biggest reason why the imperial court has been lax in military armament and plagued with corruption in the past decade or so is that the emperor is young and weak, and the country has no long-term ruler. Even though there are officials such as San Yang who are struggling to maintain it. However, it can only be maintained through hard work. If the successor is still a 2- or 3-year-old child, the future prospects of Daming are worrying. But these words cannot be spoken at all. It cannot be said from the perspective of propriety in law, or from the perspective of reason. In the past, whether it was the establishment of a crown prince or the inheritance of the throne, it was reasonable and not to be confused. From the latter perspective, it is the Empress Dowager who now holds the great power of guarding the capital. If such heartfelt words were spoken, I'm afraid they wouldn't be immediately bound and thrown into imperial prison. The righteousness of the country and personal honor and disgrace are suddenly presented to everyone, and it is not acceptable for them to not consider carefully. Finally, Yu Qian was the first to speak. I think it's not appropriate. Yu Shilang always spoke with a straight edge, and after making a decision in his heart, he kowtowed without hesitation. Our Lady Rong reports that today is a time of great prosperity and turmoil. If the entire court cannot unite and lead to the collapse of the divine artifact, it will be right in front of us. The Virgin Mary's desire to establish a crown prince is based on the principles of propriety, law, and righteousness. However, the prince in the palace is young and weak, and such a situation is extremely difficult to meet the expectations of all the people in the world. At this moment, if the crown prince were to be appointed, it would inevitably cause people's hearts to fluctuate. They speculate that the minister risked his life to admonish the Virgin Mary and request that the Prince of Heaven take charge of major affairs, guard the capital, and wait for the situation to calm down. When the emperor returns to the capital, they will carry out the appointment of the crown prince again, so as not to disappoint the hearts of the courtiers and the people. Yu Qian's words, although slightly euphemistic in the end, still have a clear meaning. Empress Dowager Sun's face suddenly darkened, and a hint of danger flashed in her phoenix eyes. She said coldly. Does Yu Shilang mean that the AI family arbitrarily manipulated power and disregarded their ancestors' wealth and fortune? I dare not. Yu Qian lowered his head and spoke. What else are you afraid of? No one expected that Empress Dowager Sun would suddenly slap the table and shout fiercely. Since entering the palace, you have been pointing out the AI family's involvement in government affairs in every aspect, and every word and sentence you have spoken of the great righteousness of the country. What is righteousness? You are all familiar with the scriptures and teachings of the sages. At this critical moment, you do not want to be loyal to your country or rescue the emperor. First, you argue endlessly about the proposal of moving south, and then you want to obstruct the crown prince's registration. Is this what you call righteousness? Empress Dowager Sun suddenly became angry, and a group of courtiers had to kneel down to apologize. The Sun.in.law, Captain Jiao Jingdao, said, Our Lady must not be angry. I believe that at such times, it is a time of righteousness and purity. Only by appointing the crown prince can we calm the hearts of all the people in the world. Hanlin scholar Chen Sun also said, I also believe that the crown prince is of great importance to the country and the state, and should be established early. The Holy Mother has spoken, and the emperor has long had the intention to establish the crown prince. As human subjects, we should be considerate of our own wishes and appoint the crown prince according to the decree. These two words made Empress Dowager Sun's face slightly better. Jiao Jing goes without saying that Sun Qi and the royal family have always been in the same lineage, and he will definitely stand on Empress Dowager Sun's side. As for Chen Sun, he is a bachelor's degree from the Hanlin Academy. The Hanlin Academy can be considered as a vassal. Once the crown prince is appointed, the officials of the Eastern Palace will inevitably be selected by the Hanlin Academy, and he naturally agrees. However, Empress Dowager Sun was also aware that their opinions alone were far from sufficient in weight. Together, they are barely able to withstand the influence of one Yu Qian. The truly useful speaker in this hall has never spoken. Hu Lao Shangshu, as an important minister entrusted by the late emperor and also the Minister of Rites, is in charge of the inheritance of ritual and law. As the Ministry of Rites is in charge, do you think the AI family is right? Empress Dowager Sun turned her head and asked the white-haired Hu Yen. To put it simply, among the large group of ministers present, there are only 2 or 3 who are truly effective in speaking. Although Yu Qian may seem outstanding, he is just a military attendant. When it comes to military affairs, he can be the master. But for a major event like the Crown Prince Suli, it still depends on the attitude of a big shot like Qi Qing. To put it simply, the people in this hall are Wang Ji, the Minister of Personnel, Hu Gui, the Minister of Rites, and Chen Yi, the left censor. Their attitude is crucial. Although Empress Dowager Sun has lived in the Deep Palace for a long time, she still has some understanding of the characters at the level of 6 ministries and 7 ministers. The Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, was referred to as the Dazhong Zai in other dynasties and was located at the head of the 100 officials. But he is already 70 years old and has long had a desire to retire. He has always been wise and safe. Chen Yi, the left imperial censor, was the leader of the Fengtian Science and Technology, and was called the General Constitution by the outer court. He had solid political achievements and gradually rose from the local level. Although he was unaware of the political situation, he had a close personal relationship with Yu Qian. Hu Gui, the Minister of Rites, has advanced seniority and is 3 years older than Wang Ji. He is easily silent. But as a loyal minister entrusted by the late emperor, speaking is extremely important. Among the 3, Empress Dowager Sun had the greatest grasp of Hu Gui. Although the act of appointing a crown prince was hasty, there was no flaw in the etiquette and laws. As the Minister of Rites, Hu Jian had no reason to oppose it. And he grew up looking up today, and his relationship with the palace is relatively better. After years of assisting in politics, there has always been some kind of friendship. Therefore, Empress Dowager Sun still has high expectations for Hu Yi's attitude. In her opinion, if Hu Yi agrees, even if Chen Yi opposes, then Wang Ji is likely to remain neutral. Even if she is more arrogant and forcefully issues an edict, she has a great chance of success. Just to her disappointment, Hu Ting seemed to be a bit indecisive. On the contrary, Chen Yi spoke first. I believe that the words of the Virgin Mary are correct. The Crown Prince is the foundation of the country, and the appointment of the Crown Prince is in line with the principles of propriety, law, and righteousness. In this turbulent situation, it is even more important to promptly restore the Crown Prince to his rightful position. Strictly speaking. At this moment, Chen Yi should not speak. In front of the hall, even if it's not facing you, it can be customized. Empress Dowager Sun asked about Hu Qian. So only when Hu Qian finishes speaking can others speak up. So as soon as Chen Yigang spoke, Empress Dowager Sun became wary and almost began to scold him for being disrespectful in front of the hall. However, after listening to his content, Empress Dowager Sun swallowed back what was on her lips. Is it difficult? Did she blame Chen Yi wrongly? But then, I heard Chen Yi continue to say. However, the Virgin Mary cannot be ignored. Both inside and outside the capital, we need to work together to defend it. Nowadays, the Prime Minister is young and weak, making it difficult to take on important responsibilities. If the capital's affairs are carried out under the guise of assisting politics, it may be difficult to take action effectively. Therefore, I request the Empress Dowager to issue an edict, first appointing the Crown Prince to oversee the regency of the country and oversee the affairs of the Prime Minister, and then appointing the Crown Prince to pacify the hearts of the world. It turned out to be this idea. Empress Dowager Sun furrowed her eyebrows and wanted to speak back, but before she could speak, she heard Hu Yan speak. Our Lady Rome reports that the appointment of the Crown Prince is a major event. The Ministry of Rites needs to choose an auspicious day to carry out the appointment ceremony, which will take at least a few days to prepare. Our army will arrive in the capital within 1 or 2 days. Therefore, I believe that we should first order the Prince of Qi to take charge of the affairs before carrying out the appointment ceremony in the Eastern Palace. After Hu Jian finished speaking, he glanced in the direction of Wang Ji. So Mr. Wang also took a step forward and spoke calmly. Hu Shangshu's words are in line with the principles of propriety and law, while also taking into account the interests of the people. I also believe that they are true, and I ask the Holy Mother to consider them. In just a short moment, the 3 big shots who had been silent all expressed their attitudes, completely different from the precious words they had just shown. Empress Dowager Sun scanned for a week and sighed helplessly. At this point, she also knew that this was the best outcome. So he said, since that's the case, let's do it according to everyone's wishes. The Ministry of Rites will first draft a memorial and set the date for its establishment. All the miscellaneous affairs of the court will be temporarily handled by the Prime Minister of the Imperial Court. I'm sorry that my family is tired. That's all for today. After speaking, Empress Dowager Sun stood up and, with the help of the inner attendants, returned to the Sinane Palace. The other leaders also stood up, but their faces remained gloomy. The Empress Dowager has successfully retired and returned to the harem to rest. But the things they have to face are just beginning after the spread of the military newspaper, the surging public opinion and discussions in the court and public. The leaders felt a headache and sighed as they walked out of the hall. I'm asking for votes. Remember to vote if you have recommended votes. End of this chapter.